think this is where my being skeptical of micro front ends is. It comes back to it does feel like it's more what's best for the developer and team. And when I think about the products that we're creating it for our users. Like they don't care how it's created. They just care about the end result. I think of some of the problems that have come along with going the micro front end way is it solves for engineering solutions, but not necessarily for the user. And so I actually don't think it's the best thing to approach. I think it's like I'd rather go through a little more pain on my team and the rest of us to figure out how to do this, but not hurt the end result. So that's my thought on it.
Kyle, I saw you come off mute. Are you gonna? I know Kyle and I probably have a really couple good use cases for this, but I'll let him.
Yeah, prove me wrong, please.
So, this is an area where I'm still trying to understand that. Like, one of the things that, as we even, at the inside of Eventbrite, we're bringing up this idea. We sort of got pushback of at what level does the micro front end sort of go, right? Do we do it all the way down to a component library level so that your micro front end is the button component, so that when you deploy it, it's then visually consistent across the board? And that's one of the my skeptic areas. That that's just, there's so much. You could go so deep with some of that. I think at least for us, I think that there's definitely going to be a trade-off at some level of consistency versus that experience. And my goal, or at least my hope, is that like others have mentioned, we have a mono repo for all of this, at least the React code. And so my hope would be that, just through process and mechanics of the way that we update within that mono repo, that at least maybe not every edge case of consistency would be covered, but at least a good portion of them, it's kind of covered through that process and sort of the deployment schemes that we have in place. I'm not sure if that covers all of what Jonathan has to say.
I was just going to say, in terms of how this can benefit the user. So we have our, at Eventbrite, I say our, I guess I don't work there anymore, but at Eventbrite, what happens is, if you're trying to create tickets and manage events, there's different teams that own part of that experience. So one team owns creating an event, one team owns the marketing tools, one team owns, the whatever, different slices of it. And so there's this entire dashboard system set up, but so many different teams own different parts of that system as a whole. And so the way that just hurts the users right now is that each page, since it's owned by different teams, literally requires a hard page refresh, going from page to page. Each one is deployed independently with its own header and footer and sidebar, so you can get into inconsistencies with your look and feel. If you forgot to deploy the header to the publishing tools part, then that might look different than it looks on the create page, and there's different nav bars. And so in my thinking in terms of how this benefits both developers and users is if you can have multiple independently deployable applications that cover a certain part of your screen, but then you have a container application that can tie those independently deployable apps together with a header, a footer, and a nav bar, then you can create a distributed single page application in the sense that, the three different teams that work parts of the same dashboard can all independently release, can get their code out, but all be a part of one look and feel that benefits, especially if you bundle sizes from all those different things by module federation. So you're shipping less code to the users. You can do client-side refreshes instead of hard, full end-to-end server reloads, client-side routing. So I think it's a look and feel, and even web performance benefits you can get from it too, on top of the ownership that you get from the micro-fronted distributed stuff. So I think that, to me, Steph, is the whole how can it benefit your users part.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of the things that you said, Jonathan and Kyle. I think these definitely resonate a lot with me. And to your point, stuff about visual and functional consistency, I think that some of those you definitely need to hold constant. I think if you kind of establish that there is going to be visual consistency, I think that is, a trap to think that it's going to be too different, right? But I think from a functional consistency standpoint, I think that having the ability to create instant consistency across all of these applications, for example, I think the page header example is the most concrete for me. Again, to roll that out, it's going to take you a bunch of time to actually do that. And if you forget to integrate it anywhere, then you have an issue. But with a technology like module federation or micro front ends, you can actually have that be instantly consistent across all of these applications. So maybe that's a factor of how we're sharing code in a monorepo. I'm not completely sure there, but I do think that there are some performance end user benefits from being able to have that instant consistency.
I also want to add a bit to Steph's questions. I believe using architecture may not have a direct impact to user experience, but it definitely have an indirect impact to what user can get over time. So if the developer have a better experience and faster experience developing features, definitely resolving issues on the UI, and being able to have that consistency of, as they describe, like visual consistency, code-based consistency, and cohesiveness, I think we can have, at the end of the day, less bugs on our user journeys. So I can say that there is an indirect impact that's coming with what's easing developers' life. Let's say React, right? Why we all need React? We can just use JavaScript, CSS, and HTML and build applications. At the end of the day, user gets the same thing. But I guess we do a better job, user get a better product at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great call out about decreasing the blast radius of a bug and also being able to build faster, deploy faster. Those are definitely things we're thinking about.
One thing that I'm skeptical about, and I want to open this to other people and maybe Steph, I kind of concerned that these code bases does not stick to a consistent let's say standards, especially when we have teams who are very isolated and in companies that they're very large and they're not together. So they may establish their own standard. Let's say one team uses pixels and another team uses relative stuff. So how do we ensure that everything is consistent? Then are we going to bring everything to shared modules to ensure consistency? So I'm just a little bit confused around how we're gonna just enforce consistency, especially when it comes to user experience impacted things around code base.
Yeah, I really like that question.
I think that's the billion-dollar question here, right? Because programmers are the most opinionated people in industries, probably across the board, and what we are trying to be dependent on is either a natural company culture of collaboration, which is forced at best, or processes to ensure that people are doing the thing the way that we want them to do it, regardless of what they're working on. So I'm thinking about this more and more, and I find it hard. There's no right answer or to ensure that efficiency is across the board. If someone could share with us if they've seen or heard anything that just works out the box to ensure that type of unit cohesion, as I like to call it, is there naturally, especially in civilian workforces. That would be awesome to hear.
I can try answering that. I'll give it a go. The consistency is the main issue and the main benefit for customers. And regarding consistency, we have two types of consistency. One would be the look and feel, the colors, and make sure the buttons look the same. And the other one is when you have, for example, the header and the footer, that every single team have 10, 15, 20 copies of the footer. There would be some structural differences and functionality differences. So the first one, I think, could be solved not with microfrontends, but with just standard governance that you have at large corporations. You will have a design language system. You will have some brand guidelines and something in place to ensure that we use the same measurements, that we use the same colors, that we make sure the website has the same style. Now, in terms of the structure, that's where microfrontends might help, because you don't have to build the same thing 100 times. You have just one footer, and if the footer requires an update to the links, maybe you have another link, or you have to put a banner across it, you don't have to make that banner on every single footer. Or because, for example, if you have 15 of them and you forgot to add the banner in one of them, then when the customer goes to that section of the website, the banner will disappear. So there are two different types of consistencies and two different ways of fixing them. But again, it's not easy, and it depends on the company. This is more like a governance, company culture problem that microfrontends might help with.
I think an interesting part here, like, and this might be just maybe the management side of me, but like, you're in a company, it's a lot easier to enforce that sort of like directionality or consistency inside of a company culture, because, you know, like, we're all pushing in the same direction, right? I can imagine that, like, trying to find that consistency and that cohesion in more of an open source setting is probably a little bit more difficult. But something that we've done, like at Eventbrite, was in the early days of setting up our monorepo, we were very explicit about a lot of the rules that we were going to have. And we put in a lot of tools and process around ensuring that, like, that path continued to be, you know, the ideal one as much as possible. And so that was something, you know, and we've continued to sort of refine that over the time frame. One of the programs that we put in place was, I'm not sure if anyone else is doing this, but like ADRs, like architecture decision records. And so we've got like these committee of folks that come together, you know, from our front end community that just like say, all right, we're going to do, this is the way we're going to do our thunk functions across the board, or this is the way we're going to use, our testing libraries and things like that. And it sometimes it sort of feels like a bit of a micromanage, but at the same time, like it's going towards that cohesion and that consistency at a developer level. Because as we get into, our monorepo, which, right now is over 200-300 workspaces, you've got to be able to like feel comfortable jumping from workspace to workspace and make edits across the board.
Yeah, I'm so curious to hear if anyone else has experience with this, because like it felt good the way that we had got everything set up. We have a team at Eventbrite, and I don't think any of this works. None of this micro-frontend stuff works unless you have a team who's willing to foster it and own, the container apps and own the golden path for teams, because it's just not going to work. It's just going to break down, and it's kind of a trade-off for each individual team. Like the opposite of micro-frontends is just this multi-repo setup where everyone just kind of has their own Webpack configs, their own whatever's their own deployment systems. But if that team is willing to sacrifice a little bit of control to follow a standard and consistent path, then they're going to be able to ship faster. And I believe to Naz's point earlier, like if the teams are able to ship faster and do their jobs more efficiently, then the end user benefits as well, because teams are able to prototype and ship quick and deliver user features very quickly. And I think that's the trade-off.
I want to jump in really quick. We've got a few more hands, and I've been sidebarring with Sean. One of the things that Clubhouse just doesn't have very well is the fact that it's invite only. And so one of the things that Sean and I have been talking about is potentially recording this. Are we comfortable doing that? That's one of the things we just want to make sure from our speakers or anyone that wants to sort of jump in and ask before we start recording this. Is everyone okay with us kind of hitting the record button from here on out?
Go for it on my end.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure.
That's fine. I wish we had started doing that at the beginning.
Yeah, that's essentially what Sean and I said.
Yeah, so all right, I'm gonna record it and also stream it so that people like who are on Android or.
I have been taking some notes too, so.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think Jonathan, to your, I know we have. I just want to plus one the investment here. You do need to have teams that are thinking about this. We use architectural decision records as well, and it sets us up for the paved path. It's very well paved, and that gives us the flexibility of making choices that affect more than one part of the organization in a uniform way. Again, our teams are not completely disparate. They're all using the same stack. They're all using the same tools. They're all using a lot of consistent patterns.
Cool. I'm gonna invite up Kerry. I think his hand's been up almost since we started this, and I think he's got a pretty burning question. So let's see what he's got.
Then, can you guys all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I had to start writing down on the whiteboard all the things I wanted to talk about. A senior engineer at Northwestern Mutual, I have built a micro front end. It mimics kind of what you were saying, Steph, with a dashboard. To talk to the point of when you want to get to a micro front end, I think we realized that when you start getting into like Docker Swarm or K8, like Kubernetes, usually you're at a point as a company that you could potentially use a micro front end. You probably have enough going on that the front end can be split in between teams. I forgot who mentioned it, but the import maps, that is a big one coming from, I know Dino is mentioning, they're working on import maps. Webpack 5 is also bringing in a lot of stuff for import maps, and we kind of had our own solution for that, because one of the hardest things that we found in doing a micro front end is the distribution of common packages. So we do have a shell that everything is launched into, and that handles most of our main imports. To kind of tag on everything that's been recently said in here is we do have a design system, so those buttons and things like that are distributed. It is in a CSS and JS solution, so there's no clashing for style tags. The one thing that we had really wanted to keep was each one of these, I'll say cards, it's a micro, we call them nano apps, because we were already kind of in a micro front end, and now we have even a deeper layer of it. They all have their own back-end services, and their section of the dashboard mimics where their space is. So they're the masters of that space, each one of these teams. I think there's 12 teams, and I think it's like about 100 engineers all together working on this. And so with them being the resource for the service that they've built, the microservice that they've built, they're also the like masters of, or the owners. Try not to say master anymore. That's bad. The owners of that micro front end card. We did have to build tools for them to develop locally because they're not bringing up everyone's application. But that was something that was a big point that's been kind of iterated on in here is you have to have some more tooling to make something like this work. It's not something where like a framework is going to just spin things up for you. And I think that barrier to entry of it, I don't want to say it shouldn't be difficult. There should be more documentation, and I know that the micro front end site has been super helpful in how they describe it. But that entry level is usually when you get to a point where you may need it. Like for the most part, you will know when you need a micro front end. The last point I was going to say is the multiple frameworks. We pretty much wasted time making it so that we could have multiple frameworks. To put it really simple, we have IDs that are in a config, and you can pretty much attach whatever you want to that section. No one in the company broke away from React and tried to do their own thing. So that would be something where that was a hurdle we went over, and then it didn't even pan out. No one really broke away from the system that was already in place. That's kind of just talking about, some of the hurdles that we did at Northwestern Mutual for making a front end.
Yeah, I like the Docker Swarm and Kubernetes point. Like if you're already able to break down your applications into that level, you've sort of got an idea, at least, of your business domains where microfrontends could benefit. And the tooling part is key. Like none of this works unless somebody loves on this thing. It just isn't going to work. You've got to have a team dedicated to ensuring its success.
And Sean, you mentioned the code splitting, correct?
Yes, sir.
So we do leverage that. Each one of our applications, like the small micro front end card or the Nano app, we were able to use code splitting. So they don't even have React bundled with them or anything like that. And most of those apps or those micro front end sections of the dashboard, even with their graphs, even with all the data that's coming through and everything like that, I think the biggest one is 800 bytes. So we're really able to leverage that shell app is kind of the first. That's the one that has Lodash. That's the one that has React DOM. It's the normal way you're going to bring in any of the pages of your whole entire site. Your whole web app.
That seems really amazing.
Go ahead.
Actually, I feel like this is the kind of thing that is like a reference architecture that should be shared more. I don't think the current micro dash front.
Go for it, Sean.
Oh, am I speaking? Am I?
Yeah, I think you were flickering mute and mute on.
Okay, I was on my phone. How is it now? Is it better?
No, you're pretty far away now.
Is it better now?
There you go.
Sorry, I'm recording this, so I have a weird iPad plus iPhone setup. Anyway, no, I was just saying like that's a pretty awesome sort of container app scenario. I wish this was shared more or open source, or like there's some sort of reference architecture for this, because I don't think the current microfrontends.org site does a very good job of this of explaining this.
Yeah, I agree.
You can.
Is that a nudge? You trying to nudge me to get on there?
I will say that the Webpack module federation, the Webpack module federation page, I think it's rather wordy, and it's I would say like even just reading through it, I can see like it's not the most approachable, but it has the same words that we're talking about: container applications, having the smaller bits and pieces be called something else. So you have your main application that loads overriding modules essentially. So yeah. I do think it's a good reference to check out, and I think that is a really good reference application to me in terms of the application of microfrontends.
One other thing that I did want to mention is people are talking about header and footer. We ended up doing that in a different way because of the kind of that reloading of the same data if there is clicking around on the page. We do it through an Nginx include. So those are included, and then everything in between those is the like the shell would be living in between those. And that's how we do all of our apps. So I guess it would be referenceable of like Next.js has zones, and you can set like a header and a footer, and then the zones can live within that. It's the same thing, but on an Nginx level.
Does that mean, Carrie, does that mean that you can't interact with the header and footer from JavaScript, or is there just a different message bus for modifying that behavior?
Sure. Well, you can interact with that like if you needed to, but it would just be through like targeting the actual reference or anything like that. I think we have one area that we do that. We used a React portal for it. It was putting a call to action in the header. So we actually were able to just put an ID there and then render that button. And it's technically coming from a component that's inside the micro front end that reaches out to a static header.
See, I think one of the main drawbacks when we compare the success of microservices versus micro front-end success, how it will be, is that the app shell itself, we don't see anything on the back-end architecture around app shell. We don't see a microservice that wrapping all the other microservices and setting a standards for them. And I think that's something that made microservices very popular and very standardized, because I think there is a distributed system architecture there. And there are frameworks like Kafka, event-driven systems that's already built, and they're very powerful for communication and scalability. And a lot of issues during availability that they resolve. But I think when we come to micro frontends, I don't see that maturity is still there. Like, let's talk about availability. What if an import fails? Of course, if you do React, maybe you can use React Suspense or React Lazy. Well, how would you deal with failures? How would you deal with availability of your apps? What if something fails, and how are we going to solve that?
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that because we did have to come up with a solution for that. Obviously, with a huge company, these services can break down and degrade, since you're calling a microservice that's calling a microservice that's calling mainframe or something. I built something that was similar to the concept of suspense. So there are fallbacks. There are generalized fallback cards. There are like skeleton recall cards. So if for some reason it failed, it would load a skeleton kind of loading state and then go and try to make that call again on the front end. That is something that would definitely need to be generalized, and actually brings up something that I had totally forgot about, bubbling up errors so that you know what's going on. That's something in micro front ends that doesn't always work super well. And we ended up passing a lot of errors up to the shell, which was a lot of extra work that I didn't see coming when we were building it out or scoping it out.
Yeah, I think that's where React error boundaries come really handy. So the way we probably solve that problem for the error and monitoring is the micro frontends will fail to load. It will fail gracefully, and then we have a very strong logging system that will basically report that something didn't work properly.
Yeah. Also, to Naz's point of having to have the shell, we are starting to see some of those things, like GraphQL Federation. You know, there's that like kind of mindset of a point to call that breaks off and calls a REST API or a SOAP service or something like that, or another GraphQL service. It's not the same in that it is still calling like us. That's just calling to a service. It doesn't break out of the way that you're doing things currently. This does, like we had to build the tool to render realistically a shell light for local development for these teams. And I think that that's a huge point that you mentioned, Naz. That is a really complicated and uncharacteristic of any of our other work that we've had to do so far.
Yeah. Can I jump on that? Because the main difference between microservices and micro frontend is basically the browser. In the browser, we need to assemble everything. With microservices, we don't have the problem. We don't have a common place. We can containerize everything, put everything in Docker, and separate them. But in the browser, we have to share the browser. We have to compose everything in the browser. So that's why the concept of these container or shell applications comes along, because you need something that is the orchestrator. You need something that is managing the rest of the application. And that shell has to be, well, the recommendation for the shell is the shell has to make sure it doesn't have a lot of business logic, and it doesn't tightly couple the other modules. So the modules should be able to render, or the micro frontends should be able to render independently and within the shell. If you start tightly coupling the micro frontends to the shell, that is where you start having issues, where you have a lot of dependencies and things like that you should avoid.
That sort of brings up an interesting question that I've had is like, it sounds like what your recommendation there is that inside of our app shell, we really shouldn't be rendering anything. It's really there to act as sort of the orchestrator or that middleware to all of our other micro front ends, right? Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, well, you can render, and that will render everything else. So the thing is tightly coupling the root or the shell to the other micro front ends. So coupling is probably the main issue with micro front ends. If you start coupling things, that is when things start to break, because you start, instead of having micro front ends, you start having a distributed monolith where the root, the shell, is the main application, and then the other micro front ends are just deployed independently. But you will start having to, for example, deploy things in sequence, and that is a big mistake, where you have to, let's say, deploy the shell first, because if you don't deploy the shell, then the micro front end will break. That is a very easy mistake to make, and also very hard to solve. So the shell should be, you should think about the shell as the place where you do minimal coding in terms of business logic, only the necessary, and the shell will just allow you to compose the other micro front ends, handle things like security, or if you're doing server-side rendering, things like that. But business logic there, we need to be careful. That's probably what I would say.
+1 to that, for sure. The area of kind of staging was what we used, in that we tried to keep it as simple as possible, that shell, because it really doesn't need to have anything else tied to it but going and making sure that the things that are going to render are set up in a way that they can and have fallbacks. But definitely +1 to that.
So I've got a selfish question, and kind of maybe switching gears a bit here. Like, assuming someone like, Eventbrite, let's say, is now wanting to go down this path of micro front ends, like, what's your recommendation on like how to start that path?
Wow.
Yeah, especially resources.
If
you can shout out like specific books, blogs, or sites where you can learn about this stuff, that'd be really great.
Let me give my 2 cents on that one. That's the question I get mostly. How do we start? Where do you start? The problem is, as developers, we always want the framework. We always want the out-of-the-box solution. And with micro front ends, the problem is that your requirements and your problems will drive the architecture. So the architecture is not something that you can just drag and drop and apply. Once you have the architecture solved, now the tools to solve these issues, I would go, there are 3 different approaches that you can take. And I always say, you don't need a micro front end framework, basically. To get started, you can start with the minimal. Like, some people even recommend start with iframes, see how it looks. I don't recommend iframes, and personally, I don't really like them. But that is a valid solution. That would be helping you composing things on micro front ends. Not saying do that, but it's just very simple. After that, if you want to get familiar, I would go with module federation. But the thing with module federation is only solves one problem, and is the requiring things at runtime, but it doesn't have all the rest of things that it will allow you to create macro front ends effectively. Like managing versionings, or what micro front ends will be loaded at what time. So Webpack module federation will give you the base, but you'll still have a long way to go. If you want to go further, there is another library framework called Single Spa, very popular, and that's for single page applications. And they recently did server-side rendering as well. So I will look into that one. And just talk to people who have done it. There are many blog posts. There are 3 main micro front end advocates that I'll recommend talking to if you want to. One is Luca, he's in London. Another one is the guy who created the micro front ends article that is very popular. And there is, I think, a Slack channel that I can share with people if they have questions. We sometimes are really active there. But again, every single company, every single use case will likely have a different solution. And I probably that's probably not the answer that you're looking for. It's a process. It requires thought because microfrontends is a completely different paradigm, a completely different way of building front end. So it takes a little while just to get your head around how to start and what things you need to solve. But somewhere out there likely already solved these problems, and I'm happy to help with those as well.
That's like the answer to that is a similar answer to like, should we use React at my company? It's like, and how do I get started? It's like, I don't know what your company's like. You know, there's so many factors that go into deciding whether or not React is going to solve your company's problems. It's the same thing, I think, in this case. You know, is my company big enough to warrant all this extra architecture? And that depends on your team. And I hate that people think that like there's a right and wrong answer all the time for all this stuff. Like you can't do that. You can't paint yourself into a corner and just assume there's some solution out there that works exactly for you, you know, and especially when you get into like application architecture, only you and your team and your company know exactly what's good for you in that moment. And it's up to you to just sort of do the work and figure it out, what it looks like for your team. And that's fine. That's okay, I think. Sounds like what Northwestern Mutual did is exactly that. Like they had a problem and they solved it in their way. That problem, that solution might not work for Eventbrite, might not work for Microsoft. However, like it's good that we get to have these discussions and come up with ideas and have these meetings like this where we're like, oh yeah, I remember what Jerry said they were doing at Northwestern Mutual. Like, hey, that sounds cool. Like we could probably do something like that with, you know, how our stuff works over here. And I love getting these discussions out in the open. You know, we've just sort of keep a lot of this stuff internal inside of our companies, and we struggle, you know, and it's so validating for me because I've had so many of these ideas. It's so validating to hear that Northwestern Mutual is doing so many similar things that I've thought of. So even if you have been doing it in like your own silo, it's so nice to come out into the community and hear that there's other people and other teams trying to do similar things. It's great.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the first step is getting into the community and starting to bounce ideas and kind of get into working sessions and find the people that are talking about it so that you can get that information flow. So this Clubhouse is a perfect starter for a lot of people. I can also give kind of a little more technical way of starting to get into it, just from my own experience. When this kind of idea was proposed at Northwestern Mutual, I just went home and cloned forked one of our repos, and then we were using React on the front end. So I can't speak to Angular or Vue. I believe Vue would be very similar, but realistically, I took the React render and made the bundle that came out of that, and made it, I think, pretty much just a space in Cloud Front, and then called that with actual call in like a regular request, and then rendered it in the shell app. So pretty much made a bundle, put it out on the internet like a CDN, and called it in the shell. That was nice. That was the first, okay, let's see if we can do this kind of pass.
That's what Kyle and I had talked about doing, quote unquote, widgetizing an app, where you can just kind of say, hey, render a thing.
The one other thing on that was the importance of props for the React component, just to talk to that side again. We did have to figure out a way to pass the props down to all of those microservices or micro apps. Sorry. And that was kind of a weird attaching things to like window and stuff like that. Kind of like how you do a server-side rendering and you pass the props along, or state too.
Interesting. It looks like we got one more hand up in the audience. I'm going to invite Rodrigo up to ask a question.
Hello, everyone. So I saw this and I immediately jumped because actually this week I started hacking on something with Module Federation, and it's really nice to hear all of this. So I started hacking because I got an idea of like improving embeds, because I used to work in a company that we did a lot of maps and widgets, and the clients most of the times they have like another website in WordPress or something, and they asked us to like embed the map in their site or share it with a partner in another site, and it was always like a kind of like bad experience, because you loaded like 2 applications at the same time, and it was really expensive. So I started thinking about the problem of embedding media stuff, and I arrived to Microfrontends from that side. And I have to say, Module Federation works really well. Like, it's also like someone said, like, you need to have a container application, but it considers actually the possibility of having like a cyclic importing and apps receiving and sending other modules. And for example, with React, you can import a component and render it as a component, so the props just flow like any other lazy loading components. It's really nice. I was really impressed. I have to say that the documentation in Webpack is like 1 page, and when you start getting into the API, there's not much. There's not much description. There's some examples, but not really documented. But I think there's some future there. Like, when I first heard about Microfrontends, wasn't really into them, and at the same time, I'm not really into microservices. I understand them because when you're in a big company, it lets you grow fast. But I'm in the opinion that if you can avoid them, you don't have the scale needed for that. You don't actually need them. And I think it's similar with Microfrontends. It's like there's a level where you need to figure out orchestrating, but that's the same thing that happens with microservices, right? So this is basically what I had to say.
Can I just add, Webpack Module Federation, if you don't think about Microfrontends, it also provides more benefits that are not in the Microfrontends context, like the one that Rodrigo just mentioned, and it's to do with the shared dependencies. So it's like, you can think about it like, if you work with Webpack externals before, it's like one step further from there, where you can stop worrying about importing React 3 times. You can just bring 3-4 different applications that will share the same container, and then they will use React. But the difference is, obviously, they can be required at runtime. So even if you are not interested in Microfrontends, do check out Webpack 5 and Module Federation, because it might actually fix a couple of other issues that you might be having. So yeah, I just wanted to say that is very, very cool.
Yeah, and actually, what I ended up like thinking is like you could even have like this like a service that like you select something from GitHub, and it creates a bundle in the cloud and associates it to your account, and then you just import it to an application using a component, a generic component that is like associated to that CDN. And so actually, like, you could start using, like someone mentioned, Lodash directly as like a module from your app without having to install it. I think there's like, for me, like there's like the adjacent solutions to solving microfrontends are way more exciting than only like microfrontends. And I think many of the problems of microfrontends are problems that need to be solved at an organization level or orchestration level with something like, I think something like that happened with microservices, right? Like they were invented and then later they came up with all of these abstractions to improve of the orchestration that was necessary. But I think we're like in stage where like technically starting to make sense, but still we're finding all of these other problems, but also like these other applications that we didn't think of.
I think that kind of loops back to a really good point that I liked that Carrie mentioned earlier, which is like we need to like come together as a community on this stuff and have these sort of conversations, because that's how we're going to solidify like what is that like path forward, and like what are the sort of things that we can like take from our individual experiences and build them into that shared sort of future path for others to kind of go on this journey. I think that that's an important part of a lot of these conversations.
Plus to that. And also solutions to the problems. I mean, we are talking at this point, this conversation has been around, shall we implement microfrontends? What are the benefits? Shall we do it? And trust me, once you start implementing them, you will have another set of problems that have to be solved. I'll give you an example, but to go to beyond the details, but let's say that microfrontends, they should be loading their own data. What happens if you have 5 microfrontends that request the same data, and you have 5 requests to the server? So in that case, we had to come up with a solution. How will you avoid 5 calls to the server? And obviously the microfrontends have to load independently, so they need to load data. And if they are not loaded in that context with all the other 4 that are loading the same data, they should be loading the same data. So then how do you come up with a solution for caching? We came up with one. I might share it soon. That is having a shared caching, a distributed cache that you can dedupe API calls. So if one makes a call, then the other 4 will just use the cache. But things like this, at some point you will encounter certain issues with microfrontends after you start implementing them. From technical issues like this one, and also the main one will be the adopting and trying to change the mindset of the team. We found that difficult, incredibly difficult, even more challenging than the technical challenges. And is when you are developing an application in this way, it's very different. You need to think about your application in a very different way. You cannot just think in a monolith way anymore. You need to make sure that the applications are developed in a way, otherwise you will end up with what I said earlier, a distributed monolith where you have to deploy 100 things to get one thing working, which is bad. It's the worst case scenario. And the only way to avoid that is by the culture, by training your developers and making sure that we have adopted this mindset where, okay, we are not thinking about pages or applications anymore. We are thinking about modules. We are talking about a small micro apps, or whatever you want to call them. I like to Carrie's name, the nano apps. Even they go even smaller. They're not micro, they're nano now. That we are developing apps in this way. So if those issues, some of us already experience. So it's very important in the community that we can share those experiences with people that are starting to implement the microfrontends, because we likely came up with a solution, and it might not be the solution for you. You might not be able to use the same solution, but at least you have an idea on how to tackle that problem.
Yeah, to talk on that, we definitely ran into that problem. Obviously, there's going to be shared data of the caches. You have to cache the data somehow. We ended up going with the Redis cache on some of those. Luckily, we were able to do that because those teams were able to own the service and have a sensible cache of the data. Luckily, in the dashboard, the charts and stuff like that weren't like extremely live subscribed like pub sub data. But what you were talking about with, kind of if you are not thinking in an architectural mindset for the teams that are going to work with it, the developer experience is extremely important. I know that this kind of even goes back to what Steph and Naz were talking about, is what ease are you going to bring the client? Obviously, our users are what we want to make a better product for. an example, I'm going to use, my micro front end that we helped build. It made the page extremely fast because all of those calls were in this monolithic page and everything was timed weird. And some of the SOAP calls take a long time to get your billing information. So we were able to make a lot of that stuff faster or have fallbacks. So it was a better step forward for our clients. I primarily do tooling at Northwestern Mutual, so the developer experience was thought of from the first time micro front end was mentioned. When we went into this, we were thinking, how do we make this as smooth for the people that are going to actually do all the building of this? And I think we did okay. I'd say we did 80% because this was a new mindset, and it wasn't just the way they had been doing code for the last 5 years. It was a little bit different, but one thing that I set up was like a little front end guild type meeting that was bi-weekly, and it was just a touch base of, hey, what are those hardships you're having, or what concepts aren't you getting? Because I'd like to talk to you, and our team can back you up on those, and we can sit with you and foster a community around micro front ends rather than just, hey, everyone needs to do it this way. That's never going to stick.
I really like that call out, and I've got 2 points I want to tack onto that. Like, first, we're doing the same thing at Eventbrite. Ours is actually, we have a guild meeting weekly, but we also have we've set up what we call the ambassador meeting for like our power users, the ones that like sort of want to push the envelope of what we're doing at Eventbrite architecturally and infrastructure wise. And so we have both of those. We have 2 different meetings weekly for those sort of events, right? And I think that that's been extremely important and helpful in kind of continuing to push these efforts forward and to really kind of level up the entire community within the company. And so I'm sort of curious, like we're already 20 minutes over, which I think is awesome. And we've had a whole lot of like people kind of jumping in and out of this conversation throughout the time frame here. I'm curious, do we want to set up more of these going forward? At least one more, maybe this same time next week? Like, what do people think about that?
For it, actually, sorry for the plug. Next week is Node Congress, and I will be able to share a little bit more details of the actual implementation. I have a Microfrontends talk on this basically next Friday. So I might not be able to join next Friday because of Node Congress, but I'm up for any time. I love to talk about this.
Yeah, that sounds great to me too. Is there a club for front end on Clubhouse? Where can we start one?
I don't know how to do that, but I am 100% up for that. Like,
yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, sounds awesome. I mean, I'll wait for the invite. No. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I think that this is an interesting, Clubhouse being new. I think this is a really good platform for it because, like, I've never talked to a lot of you. I think I've only talked to Ryan before. And I'm sitting over here in the Midwest with a bunch of experience, and I would love to give it,
This reminds me of like the end of conference when they would do like Q&As and like a bunch of people could just like talk. This is amazing.
I like Ruben's kind of call out of a plug there. So like the way I was thinking about ending this was like just around the room here, the speakers of just, is there something out there you want to plug real quick before we end this off? And then I can work on getting another one of these scheduled in like maybe a week or 2 weeks from now.
I have a question, maybe a bit also like out of topic, but I've been hacking this, and I was wondering, like, what do you think about something as like micro frontends as a service? Because it's something I've been thinking about, and I think there's a void there.
Like consultancy or what?
No, something more like a registry, like NPM, but like for.
I see. I had the idea. I mean, there is one. Not a registry, and not sure it's actually Microfrontends, but there is a website where you can see reusable user experiences, and they have actually an article on Microfrontends. I'm still undecided if it's actually Microfrontends or not, but what's the name of the site? I'll just give it to you now. You can take a look. They have like reusable components, but the difference is they say that you can deploy them independently. Their website is bit.dev, just bit, B-I-T. Something like that, more or less? Like a catalog of...
Yeah, I was thinking something like that, like you can like I said, like connect to your GitHub and like select any repo that is available, and this service it can be a repo for someone else. It can will make it available for you as a CDN, and then you ideally, I see that like if Module Federation ever lands in Create Racked App, then it will be really easy to adopt. Like you just import a component that handles all the connection, and you can import anything from anywhere like that.
I think in the context of open source, this would be a really good idea. Just to have a place where you can reuse, because these are mostly components, like having a component library. But what if you have like a widget library that is just a way of plug and play microfrontends into your application? That would be awesome.
Cool, thanks.
My only plug is if anyone wants any help, you can hit my Twitter up. I'm more than happy to help and jump in code if need be. You can find it in my account if you click on me, I believe.
Yeah, same. I'm really excited about sharing about microfrontends and helping others in their journey. And yeah, sorry for the shameless plug earlier. I didn't really mean to, but yeah, I mean, if you want to learn about American Express and how American Express fixed these issues, then just you do take a look at the Node Congress talk. I can explain with examples and things like that. So cool.
I'm going to be less shameless with my plug. I have no shame in saying this, but our team's hiring. And so if you want to help fix a problem, if you want to help work on this sort of thing at the scale of Eventbrite, hit me up. I'm looking for some senior staff and principal engineers for our team.
Cool.
Kyle, for the record,
we are also hiring, but yeah.
Kyle, for the record, since you started this whole conversation because you were thinking about a move towards microfrontends, what do you think now?
Oh, I think that's a great closing question. Yeah, I think it sounds like we're still headed in the right direction, right? I think a lot of the assumptions that we sort of had going into this conversation and what we were kind of planning in, like a 3-year vision doc that we've been working on internally, like a lot of it sort of continues to ring true. The things we're trying to solve, the way we're trying to solve them, it all sounds like spot on to what I'm hearing from you all. It sounds like we're definitely going to run into some gotchas along the way, but it sounds like we've got, we've made some amazing friends through this call to be able to help us get through them. So I'm super stoked for that.
Yeah, anytime, Kyle.
Except next Friday. Anytime except next Friday.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, this was awesome. Let's try to do it again. Not about just DevOps in general. That's my plug. This stuff kind of all falls under a category of conversations and discussions around that I've coined as DevOps instead of DevOps. DIV, DevOps, and just sort of front-end tooling problems. So yeah, I would love to keep talking about all this stuff.
I'm going to follow Kyle's plug. My team at AWS is also hiring front-end, mid to senior level. So come help me make this decision.
Everyone is hiring.
Yes, I'll also follow suit. I'm hiring as well. But really, check out import maps. It's going to make things a lot better in this space.
Yeah, plus on that one, plus one that.
Plus
check
one,
out.
plus two. Can I put +3 on that? Import maps is going to change this a lot.
Mike,
Single spa, do it.
Mike,
So check out Single Spa.
Mike, you've got nothing in your bio. No one. I know where you work, but maybe you want to explain a little bit more than we're hiring with no details.
I'm new to this Clubhouse thing. All right. Yeah, I work at Ionic. If you want to come work with us, we do a lot of cool mobile app stuff. But we're also hiring just front end engineers. So if you're interested, come build the future of the apps.
Been a fan since 2014, Mike.
Shush.
I've got nothing to plug. I hope everyone has a good weekend, and it's Chinese New Year, so happy Year of the Ox to everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Thanks all. I'll try to get a group set up, and then we can get another one of these going in a week or two. Sorry to the folks we didn't get answers to.
All right. Bye.